Here's my quick analysis of the incredible essay called The Tragedy of the Commons. When I first read the title alone, I thought that the commons would refer to common folk or regular people like us. But in fact, the commons in the title refers to the shared resources that are supposedly a right to every quote unquote free man. And the article, or essay if you want to call that, argues that this freedom that we assume, freedom to, let's say, the ocean or public land that every supposedly free individual has, is a limited resource. And especially in a situation where overpopulation is a problem, you cannot have this freedom. And the commons, or the resource in this case, will suffer because of this problem. And then Hardin goes into some ways in which we can mitigate this risk. But we'll get to that. What I found interesting is the way he phrases this problem. And this is the first line of the article. So it says, quote, "The population problem has no technical solution. It requires a fundamental extension in morality," end quote. What interesting phrasing is that? He also mentions that he borrowed it from somewhere else, but a problem having no technical solution, but it requiring an extension in morality is an interesting way to phrase the population problem, because we always assume that science has the answer, right? We think that when a problem comes, science will find a way to save us from that problem. An example that comes to my mind is the ozone depletion that was happening in the 1990s and early 2000s. I remember studying it in school, ozone depletion. But through certain scientific analysis, research, recommendations, and governments acting on it by removing some chemicals from our refrigerators and many other such regulations, I would assume, we fixed that problem, which means that even though the problem of ozone depletion, ozone layer depletion, was very challenging, it did not require us to redefine our morality about whether this is good or bad, or what's the meaning of this. We didn't have to think of those things. We relied on science, we did the research, and we fixed the problem. But overpopulation, Hardin argues, is not such a problem. Science can only give us data, but what does winning over this problem look like? Every solution to overpopulation will have some demerits. I'll take an example very quickly after this, but the argument is just to say that we need to redefine what tackling this overpopulation problem will mean. It cannot be right or good in the technical sense of the word. That's just what the first statement means. So let's take an example. So in Colorado, there is the Rocky Mountain National Park. I've lived here for many years, and every year I consequently see the effects of overpopulation. Thousands of visitors every single day try to get into the park, and rightfully so, it is public property after all. But just the fact that the population growth has been exponential reduces the quality of the park. Earlier, you had to maintain the park, let's say, once a day. A trail had to be maintained once a day. Now, because of overpopulation, you need park rangers there continuously. And this is not just for the paths or the resource itself, which is the park, but for entry also. If there is a 2-hour queue to get into the park, does that not take away the beauty of the park itself? There are many ways to fix this, but none of these are just. There is always a compromise. The current model that is being followed is that number one is first come, first serve. Again, we can argue the legality or the righteousness of this, but again, inherently not fair. Number two is you charge a fee to enter, which again increases every year. I remember it was $10 once, and now it is 27, something like that, per day. So that is another way to stagger entry or make it accessible only to a certain class of people, let's say, who can afford that. Again, morally questionable. Another thing we can do is mark sections of the park as private property, which ensures that the quality is maintained, but again, legally very challenging. Another thing is reservation. I've tried renting those overnight stays at the campgrounds. It's impossible to get a reservation. They run out months in advance. I have to plan for next year right now. So again, we can see how overpopulation is degrading the natural resource of a national park. And this is where Hardin comes in and says that if we do not do a few things, let's say hold people morally responsible or bring in conscience somewhere, or mutual coercion is another technique he talks about. If we don't do any of that, that is the tragedy of the commons. It will continue to degrade, and the beauty will be lost forever. And we can see all of this happening in today's world with overfishing, for example, or overgrazing. He takes this example of a bunch of herdsmen with their sheep grazing a piece of land. If every person acts in a selfish manner, and which is again natural because he doesn't see the effects of overgrazing by his sheep, and he again optimizes for himself, he will bring down the grazing land for everyone else. So very interesting problems that we need to consider. Here's a quote that illustrates this. Quote, "Each man is logged into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit in a world that is limited. Ruin is the destination toward which all men rush, each pursuing his own best interest in a society that believes in the freedom of the commons. Freedom in a common brings ruin to all." Continuing later, "The individual benefits as an individual from his ability to deny the truth, even though society as a whole, of which he is a part, suffers." End quote. Brilliant again. And he also makes the same argument against overbreeding, although he himself had 4 children. Again, questionable morality, because individual cases need to be evaluated as such. But he again says that if people are allowed to breed on their will, they aren't going to take care of the resources which the children consume. The society takes the brunt for that, so they should not be allowed to do that. Again, very controversial, because in my analysis, or in my view, this world is limited, but it does have enough for everyone's needs, but it does not have enough for a single person's greed. This is again another famous quote that someone else might have said at some point. I remember it from childhood. But the world is big enough for all of us, but not enough for even a single person's selfishness or greed. So very interesting that we need to keep in mind. There's one more thing that I wanted to touch on, which is replacement rate. You can see today's countries who are struggling in maintaining their population, namely South Korea, Japan, and such, where they desperately need people to quote unquote breed and have children. And then we have places, mostly in Africa, where the replacement rate, or the total fertility rate, TFR as it is called, is way above 2.1. I believe some countries like Niger have like 5 or 6. I don't know how that's possible, but that's the reality of today. The 2.1 replacement rate is what's ideal, right? So yeah, we are headed for troubled times if we do not control that. And he also argues that the population will reach a limit after which it will not grow, which again seems to be true with all the population growth models around. Somewhere around 10 billion is said to be the number at which population will stabilize, because after that point, if the population continues to grow, the life of the existing population will deplete in such ways that people will not either be capable of reproducing or want to reproduce more. Either society will be too cramped, too depressed, or people will, for example, the cost of goods will go so high that people will not want to have children in this world. Again, I'm sure we see cases of this today as well. But using these arguments, we can come at some number after which the population will stop growing. And we need to take care of the commons, which is free air, free water, free oceans, free land. We need to be responsible when we are dealing with all of this if we want to keep them for the future. So that is my understanding of the incredible essay. Everyone who worries about overpopulation should definitely read this essay. Not that everything he said is true, it's just an analysis. Again, like I said, he doesn't place blame on the few individuals who are making the moves, the guys at the top who refuse to take any blame. So I think he should have addressed that, or maybe the consciousness at that time or the conversations at that time were not in that sphere. But anyway, it is clear today that the rich people of today have had enough and more, and it is time for them to take it easy, give back a little maybe. So yeah, I hope you have fun reading this. Thanks for listening to me.